Okay, so just want to make a quick video here on the Prisma Audio Lumen and the Lux right here. I'm just on the tour for these two and I figured I'd give my thoughts. For those who haven't heard about these yet, these are two high-end semi-flagship IEMs from Prisma Audio, and that's an IEM brand from Australia. They're also known for previous IEMs like the Azul, and the tunings here are rather competent. Now, the reason why these are interesting to people, particularly the Lumen, is that it measures exceptionally well, and also the praise that the product has gotten from various different reviewers, including from Griffin on our team. I'll leave a link to his article in the description here, where basically he says this is the new reference point for excellence, but there's been other reviewers who have praised the Lumen for similar reasons and have said similar things about it. You seem to get two different types of reactions to this information. On the one hand, there are folks who seem to think that there's no way that a product like this at $1,400 could possibly be as good as some of the ridiculously priced IEMs out there that are like $6,000 or $10,000 or whatever. Yes, people believe this. On the other hand, you have a lot of folks reasonably identifying that $1,400 is a ridiculous amount of money to spend on an in-ear headphone, thinking along the lines of, that's a waste of money, no way it sounds better than my $80 whatever, or I can spend $200 and get 90% as good, that sort of thing. Sane people think that $1,400 is an absurd amount of money to spend on in-ear headphones. But here's the thing. I don't actually like this very much. I much prefer the Lux. And if you know about these IEMs and how they sound, the Lumen is the reference sounding one, and the Lux is the more V-shaped, the more bass and treble focused one. So, clearly, I am the fun one on our team here. No, there are reasons why I prefer the Lux, and I'm going to go into that now. And we can identify those reasons by understanding how these devices actually perform when we're wearing them relative to how our anatomy is filtering sound, relative to what our brain expects based on our physical features of our ears, because we have this now. So I want to just quickly move over to our forum here to show you guys the measurements that I've taken for this IEM, because I have the default measurements here relative to the JM1 baseline that many of you guys know and are familiar with, but I also have it relative to my own HRTF, showing how this is actually performing and responding in my own ear. So here's the Prisma Lumen, again measured on the BNK528 relative to the JM1 diffuse field baseline. You can see that it measures extremely well. You'll notice the lighter shading here around that sort of center average, and that's because I'm measuring with all the included tips, and that changes where the length mode resonance is, or it changes how prominent it is. Because if you think about it, a smaller tip allows you to insert the IEM more deeply into the canal, and that propagates the treble differently. So that's how it is, again, relative to a population average. But here's how it sounds relative to me with my anatomical features, with my pinna effect substituted in for the population average one. But also, this is measured at a shallower insertion depth to simulate a longer ear canal, which is what I have because I hear a length mode resonance at around 6 kilohertz, and that's what this more accurately reflects. So for me, the Prisma Lumen is actually rather glaring, fatiguing, shouty, that sort of thing, because it's got all this lower treble dominating over the rest of the response. So it's not that, by default, overall, this is a dark IEM. It's a fairly neutral, incredibly neutral IEM. It's just that it is going to behave rather differently, and it's going to take something that would ordinarily sound neutral and make it sound rather unpleasant. And so what does this sound like? Well, again, I've talked about this at length in the past. If you have cymbal hits with this kind of sound signature, or anything with percussion or drums, snare drums, that kind of thing, it's going to cause the lower portions of those tones to dominate over the things that sort of should be ringing out more clearly. They're being masked by the lower portions of those tones, and it makes them sound compressed and congested. And all of this is not a great experience, not because this is a poorly tuned IEM, but because the length mode resonance is causing this kind of feature in the response. And there's another element to this, which is that when I insert this IEM into my ear, it has a tendency to want to work its way to the edges of my ear canal. So it's not falling out, it still is fitting in the ear, it's still creating a seal, but it's at the edges rather than the furthest point at which I can push it in. And there's no getting around that. Where the nozzle here connects to this outer part of the shell, I'm not sure you guys can see this here, it's a bit fatter on this end of the shell, and that pushes the IEM out of my ear ever so slightly. It makes it sort of work its way out of my ear to the edge of the ear canal. And this is what makes this length mode issue even more punishing. Now, again, you might be looking at this going like, well, how do I know that? Well, this is where you would actually have to personally test for yourself with other IEMs to figure out where typically your length mode is. But the other factor here is that not all shells are going to be like this. I actually really like the color. I like the visual design. I like the way that it feels. It feels, like it's made of nice materials, but the way that this fits in the ear, it sort of just works its way out a little bit. And this is the unfortunate result, because there's a greater distance of air volume between the drivers and my eardrum. As always, this is nothing about technicalities. This is nothing about driver type, or there's nothing about that going on here. This is literally just to do with how the IEM is propagating sound at my eardrum, and it's going to be different for every person in exactly this way. And if you're wondering like what the sort of range might be for a person, well, you could have a length mode resonance anywhere from 5 kilohertz to 9 kilohertz, depending on the size and shape of your ear canal. And unless you've tested this, unless you've tried to do tone generation and identify where your length mode resonance is, you're not going to know exactly where that spot is for you, or how IEMs are typically going to propagate treble for you. So it does, if you want to like be smart about your IEM purchases, you need to do tone generation with tools like Audiophile, or there's various other tools out there to figure out where length modes are typically showing up for you, because that'll give you an indication of whether or not you have longer or shorter ear canals, larger or smaller ear canals. And for those with more childlike ear canals, you're going to have an easier time with this IEM, because your length mode is probably going to be higher up in frequency, where you're typically seeing a bit of a dip here. Now, moving on to the Lux, and again, this is the V-shaped one, and it's the same shell design, just a different color. So the same issue applies to me, where it sort of works its way slightly out of the ear a little bit to the edge of the ear canal, enhancing the length mode resonance at 6 kilohertz. And the reason why the Lux works so much better for me, like it was instantly better, is because there's so much more upper treble to mask this effect. So you don't notice that glaring coming through. You don't notice that percussion compression, as I've called it. It sounds way more detailed. It sounds way more clear and just, refined overall. Not because the treble is amazing, not because the treble is balanced even, it's too much, but because it's masking these problem areas for the IEM that exist for me lower down. So let me show you the data on this one. Again, the bass is ridiculous on this IEM. This is unhinged levels of bass and treble, in my opinion. Too much for me, but it has a really, really, really good mid-range, and the upper treble is masking the problem areas lower down. Now, you're not going to see this on this graph, because this is, again, compensating to the diffuse field JM1 baselines of the population average ear, and here it is for my ear and for how I hear it, based on, again, the shallower insertion depth, which is more similar to how I would hear these IEMs, because I have, again, a longer ear canal. It's conjecture, we don't know this for sure, but based on where I'm actually hearing this subjectively, that's most likely what's going on. So, while I'm not going to say this is perfect, it's not my kind of sound signature. The colorations in the upper treble make it so that the lower treble problems for me are less of a problem. And that's really how I feel about these two IEMs. I give the Lumen an overall sound score of 4.5, but again, because the fit is kind of weird for me, that bumps it down to a 4.1. The Lux, I give a sound score of 6.1 out of 10, but again, because of the same fit issues, I bump that down to a 5.3 overall. Now again, to put this in the context of the rest of the conversation around this product, this is not a matter of like the crazy high-enders who are praising $6,000 IEMs being right, and that, people who are praising the Lumen are wrong. That's not at all what's going on. It's literally propagating sound differently for me compared to Griffin, compared to Mark Ryan, compared to the creator of the IEM, right? Like, this is not something where you can just look at it and go, yeah, that's how it's going to sound to me. So when everybody is getting hung up on, perfect measuring IEM on the one hand, or technicalities and the resolution and the whatever else on the other, know that the in-situ response is likely very different for you than it is compared to what you're seeing on the measurement, and therefore you cannot possibly know what it's actually going to sound like for you without trying it, or you have to go through these exercises of identifying where length mode resonance are going to be showing up for you to be able to make an educated decision on whether or not these are the right IEMs for you. In my opinion, despite the fact that I do not like the Lumen, and for me it does not sound good, I think the Lumen is an incredible achievement in terms of its overall linearity. It's just that it is only appropriate for those with mid to small size ear canals. So again, if you are a person with smaller features, this is likely to be one of the best sounding IEMs of all time. But how do you know that? You have to figure this out. If it's not, if you're like me and everything about you is large, this probably isn't going to be the right one. The Lux, on the other hand, could be. And the Lux, I mean, it's not my kind of tuning because it's too V-shaped, but good lord is it ever a ton of fun. Anyways, that's all I had to say about the Lumen and the Lux, and I know that for a lot of people, like, they were hoping that this would be like their endgame IEM because it measures well, it's getting positive feedback from the community, or at least certain portions of the community. My answer is yes, it could be your endgame IEM. It could be the perfect IEM, provided your features are sufficiently meager. If you're a big boy like me, I would caution you about the Lumen and I'd recommend the Lux instead. If you're interested in a deeper dive on the Lumen, I'll leave an article by Listener in the description below. And again, this is the one that is praising it to the high heavens as the new standard for excellence. I obviously don't share that opinion, but I can absolutely understand where he's coming from. And that'll be up on headphones.com along with the rest of the rankings that we have for other headphones and IEMs from the rest of our team. And of course, if you want to chat with me, you can do so in our Discord, also linked below. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.